Now let's dig a bit deeper into that Django templating language. Because it's not just there to load static files, instead it's mainly helpful when it comes to outputting dynamic content. And at the moment here I have just some static content, just some text. But later we will be working with a database, we'll be fetching data from there, and now already we can simulate that we have some dynamic data. For that, let's say here in views.py, in this index function which we have to load all our meetups, we have a meetups variable which holds a list of meetups. And now let's say every meetup in there is simply a dictionary and it has a title, and it then has a title of a first meetup, for example. And of course we would have more content than just a title, but this is just a first scenario, just a first example. And of course we don't just have one list item, but we have two, let's say, and the second item has a title of a second meetup. Now we might want to output those meetups in our template. And for that we need to inject that data into our template and then control in that template code how that content should be output. For this we can add a third argument to the render function. And that third argument is a dictionary where we can set up any key value pairs of our choice. And we could, for example, add a key named meetups here, but that name is up to you. And then as a value, we define some value which will be accessible inside of that template under that name. And here I'll point at my meetups list, which now means that this meetups list is provided under this key to that template. And in the template, we can then output it. We can, for example, output the title of the first meetup item, let's say here in a h2 tag, by using double curly braces. So now no percentage sign, but opening and closing double curly braces. This is the so-called interpolation syntax provided by Django, or by the Django Template Language, and that allows us to output content stored in a variable. And variables in your templates are those keys which you set up in this third argument, in this dictionary which you pass to render. So here I have a key named meetups, hence here I could output meetups. Now it is worth noting though that meetups in this case is not a string or a number, but a list, and therefore we might want to loop through it. We're going to do this in a second. For the moment, I'll just drill into it and access the first list item, and then there the title key, since that first item will be a dictionary. And here we can do this with a dot notation, which is not standard Python code, but which works like this in the Django templating language, where we then access the first item in a list with the index 0. And then, since that first item will be a dictionary, we also access dictionary keys with the dot notation. And again, that's not standard Python. In Python, we would be using square brackets to then access the first item and the title. But here in the template language, it's dots everywhere instead of these square brackets, and title without single quotes. And that will access the title of the first list item in that meetups key value, which is that list here. And if I save this, save all the files, and reload, we see our first meetup here. And that's another feature of the Django template language, using interpolation to output a value. Now, often you also have conditional content. For example, we could have another key here, show meetups, which is false. And if it's false, we don't want to show meetups. Of course, here false is hard-coded, but this could be a value coming from a database or from anywhere else. So now in the template, we might want to check if show meetups is true. And if it is true, I want to show this title. If it's false, I don't want to show it, or I maybe want to show some fallback message. And we can do this with another Django template language feature. We can add a so-called if tag. Now for that, we again use these percentage sign curly braces, we basically always use them unless we deal with interpolation here. And then there we can use the if command, if you want to call it. Here we used the static command, the static tag as it's actually called. Here we use the if tag. And then we can basically write a condition here as we're used to. And we could, for example, check if show meetups. And keep in mind, show meetups will be available here because I'm providing a key named show meetups here in this dictionary. And then we're reading that value in here and using that in our if condition. Now, if that's true, then I want to show this h2 tag. Otherwise, I don't want to show it. You don't need to indent here, by the way. Unlike in standard Python code, indentation does not matter here in HTML. It does not matter. I'm just indenting it for readability. It's not required technically. But then here, we can end this block with end if. And we have to end it. That's another difference to standard Python. There, of course, if you have an if statement, you don't need to end it. Instead, it ends once there is no more indented content. Here, it's different. Indentation does not matter, but therefore you then have to explicitly end your if statement. And if I save this, if I reload, we don't see the title because, of course, here I did set show meetups to false. If I set it to true, then we will see it again. And of course, we could also set up some fallback, some else case content by also adding else in here, or elif if you have a else if condition. Here I just have else, and then I could say no meetups found, like this, and then maybe switch show meetups back to false here, save this, reload, and now I get no meetups found, and therefore this works. And that's all just some dummy code. We will swap it for some real project code later, but these are key features of Django when you're working with templates, and therefore you have to know these features. Now, the last important feature at this point is the for loop, which I want to show you. Because, of course, here we have a list of meetups, and therefore drilling into a specific meetup manually, as I'm doing it here, doesn't make too much sense. Hence, it might make more sense to loop through the meetups and then repeat some HTML content for every meetup we find. And of course, we can also do that with help of another tag, with help of the for tag. And then we have, again, basically the same syntax as we know it from standard Python. We can go through all the meetup items, let's say in meetups. So meetups here is again coming from this dictionary, this key here. And then this name, meetup item, is up to you. This is a local variable which will be available inside of that for loop in that template. And here we then also have to end this just as we ended the if block, because again, indentation does not matter. And then here we write the HTML code, which will be repeated for every meetup item. And that could be a paragraph where we now interpolate, which means output in the end, meetup item.title. And now we're doing this for every meetup item. Hence, if I save this all, I don't see it right now, because show meetups is still false. But if I set this to true manually here, then if we save this and reload, we see a first meetup and a second meetup. And that's now the for tag in action. And after interpolation and the if tag, that's the third key Django template language feature, which you will use all the time and which you therefore have to know. And with that, we now gathered all those core building blocks which we need to enhance our page a little bit more before we then also finally start interacting with a database and with real data.